Colleagues, we're at a really important time. I think the conversations we're going to have over the next 2 days are really, really important for Canada, for Canadians, and really appreciate you being here to participate with us. I don't think that there would be a more important way to kick off the conference than to have our Minister of National Defence, the Honourable Bill Blair, to join us. You've seen his bio. I don't think I need to waste too much more time. What I'd really like to do, Minister, is just thank you for your service. We know that you're in earnest in wanting to help the members of the Canadian Armed Forces, the men and women who serve, and we're really proud to have you as our Minister, and we're really proud to have you on our stage. Please, Minister.
Thanks, Steve. Well, thank you very much, Guy, and good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you all for allowing me to be back here at the CDA Institute's Ottawa Conference on Security and Defence. I wanted to also acknowledge that this is your 93rd year. That's
not me personally, Murray.
No, I remember what you were doing 93 years ago. But I think the longevity of this conference is a testament to its value in bringing us together to better understand and to address our defence and security challenges. And perhaps there has been, as Guy has said, no more poignant time to get together for this conversation than where Canada finds itself today. These are interesting times, and we are facing, I think, unique challenges. But I want to share with you that we're ready. We're ready to answer the moment. And although these are challenging times, sometimes adversity doesn't build character, it reveals it. And I believe this is also an opportunity for us to reveal the character of our nation. Canada has been reminded of its importance to each of us. We have been renewed in our patriotism of this country. We are forced to stand up to challenges that perhaps even a few months ago we would not have been able to anticipate, but we're ready to meet that moment, and we are going to stand strong and united together as we address the challenges we face. And fortunately for the Canadian Armed Forces and for my ministry, this conversation didn't begin just in the last few days as we face these challenges together. It began some time ago about the importance of renewing our relationship with Canadians and with our allies, and to step up and to do more. When I first got this job, I remember going to a very public forum, and they gave me a speech, and it was a typical good political speech, and it said everything was awesome and we were doing swell. And quite frankly, I said I can't give this speech because everything isn't awesome right now, and we're not doing well. We need to do better. We need to invest more. We need to spend more money, but we also need to invest in our Canadian Armed Forces and the people who serve in it, because we had been, I think, overly complacent for many years, decades of underinvestment in the Canadian Armed Forces. And we acknowledged that we needed to do better. And it became a very important and sometimes challenging conversation with Canadians. And that's the important conversation, by the way, not just with our allies, but with Canadians about what we needed to do in the Canadian Armed Forces. The fact that we needed to invest more, we needed to spend more. But it wasn't just presenting them with a shopping list. It wasn't say we need to buy these big shiny new things, new ships, new planes, new missiles, new munitions. Those are all really important things. But it was about building the foundations of the Canadian Armed Forces so that the men and women who have made the extraordinary choice to serve and defend their country had not just the tools, but all of the foundations that they needed to do the job of serving this country. And it wasn't just as well about having a conversation with Canadians about what we needed to invest in, but it was the story of why. And that story, and it goes back to Yuri's opening remarks, was about our sovereignty, our independence, our place as a nation, our responsibility to our own country and to our own citizens. And so when I appeared here last year, we were just a few days away from releasing our new defense policy. And that defense policy came from a number of important conversations, including conversations that we had right here in this room. And it was a result of conversations, first of all, with Canadians about what was important to them. And they made it clear that they needed us and wanted us to do more. They made it clear that the story of the Canadian Armed Forces was not just the extraordinary work that they've done around the world, but also the responsibility to defend our country, to build our country, to ensure that we asserted and defended our own sovereignty. It also was a conversation with the members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and they were pretty good about telling me what they needed to do. And they said, we need to invest in our people first. We need more people. We need a lot more people. We need new skill sets. We need to change the way we've been doing business over the past many years. We need to go faster, and we need to be more effective. We need to be able to support the men and women of the service. And we've gone through 3 years of actually losing more people than we'd been able to gain. And I remember sitting here on this stage at this event, and I used a rather provocative phrase and said that we cannot continue along that path of not getting more people in the door than we're able to hire because we need more people. I used the phrase death spiral. I would warn you all, that can be very provocative. Be careful when you say that. But I think it was an important acknowledgement that we needed to do things differently. And I'm very encouraged to say that the Canadian Armed Forces, as they always have done, answered the call and are now making the changes that are necessary to enable us to do that. But they also told us, and because I went to town halls right across the country, and I spoke to our Armed Forces members, and I said, we talked about how difficult it can be to serve your country in the armed forces. And they told us some of the challenges they faced. And they said, you have to address this so that we can retain our very best people. And so we've had that conversation, and we're making those investments as well. Investments in housing, in childcare, investments in health services. We're addressing compensation and benefits disparities that are really making it very, very difficult to attract the very best and retain them. We're investing in their barracks and training capacity so that we can train the people that we need. We talked about the kit that we need to provide them with and the platforms. And we talked about the challenges that are coming for us in the future. We have made commitments, for example, and I'm going to be announcing in a few weeks that we've signed a contract with our nation's shipbuilding industries to make sure that we get the destroyers, the submarines, the icebreakers, and the joint supply ships that we need to maintain security in our maritime environments. But we're going to need sailors, we're going to need marine techs, we're going to need people to serve on those things. And so that work has begun as well. And it's an important investment that we need to make. One of the things I also heard, and I look around this room and I see so many members from industry, and I want to acknowledge to you all, production is deterrence, and it is the key to our security. And we need to redefine our relationship with Canadian industry, and particularly our military industries and aeronautic industries, and it's important that we do that. And so when I first got this job, I came to industry and I said, what do you need from us? And they said very simply, we need clarity and certainty. We need to know where you're going, but we also need to know the certainty of long-term contracts and what's available to us. And so we went out and worked hard to make sure that we could provide them with that certainty in that direction. But it also became apparent that our processes were also an impediment to getting things done. And so some really important work has begun, and is not yet finished, but it's begun in developing a new defense industry strategy for the Canadian government and how we relate and work with industry in this country. It's an important conversation. We've already looked at some of our procurement processes, and one of the things that does happen in government, excuse me, I'll just get a little bit of water here. One of the things that does happen in government is every time something goes wrong, we add 3 more layers of process. And we've been doing this for so long that we've over-processed ourselves. And so in many cases, we can't go forward or back. And things just take simply too long. We need to be agile and responsive to meet the moment that we now face. And so we have begun to that process, and just over the past few weeks, I have been meeting with roundtables of executives from our industries in various sectors, in the aeronautics sector, in just a number of different sectors that are really important to us. And the question that I'm putting to that table is, how do we work better with you, and how can you work better with us? And instead of all those conversations being so damn transactional, we started to talk about having a relationship, even a partnership with our industry. I see other countries do it better than we do it, and we need to do it better, and we will. We are also, I want to address the need to make investments in this country. We made commitments in 2013 that we would spend 2% of our defense budget, on our defense budget, 2% of our GDP. We have never come close to meeting that obligation. We're getting closer now. I am encouraged to say that virtually everybody who wants to be the next Prime Minister of Canada has indicated they're willing to accelerate to that path and to achieve it. And what I have been able to say to each and every one of them is that the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence will be ready. When that decision is made, and I believe it's inevitable that that decision must be made, that we are going to invest more in our national defence. We've been doing the hard work at the Department of National Defence and at CAF, and we'll be ready. And we'll be ready to respond in an appropriate way to meet this moment. Now, we have seen with the imposition of tariffs this week that there is a very significant threat to our economy, to our industries, to our workers. And in order to appropriately meet that, I would also acknowledge to you that in our defense investments, we're going to invest not just in Canada, but around the world, because we want to get the very best of equipment for our armed forces. But there is a renewed emphasis now and an opportunity for us to invest in our country, invest in our workers, invest in our industries and in our economy through the investments that we will be inevitably making for the Canadian Armed Forces. And I think this is the great opportunity that presents itself within the work that we have been doing on defense. One of the things that I think is our greatest opportunity is we can go very quickly if we invest in the foundations of the Canadian Armed Forces first. If we build that housing, if we build those barracks and increase that training capacity, if we invest in our own equipment right here at home, the opportunities that present to us in the far north. Later on today, I'll be heading up to Iqaluit to make some announcements about the locations of the first Northern Operational Support Hubs. Those are investments in Canada. Those are investments in our infrastructure and our capabilities. And one of the things that I have heard from the Northerners and from the Canadian Armed Forces, that defending our North, defending our Arctic, and making sure that we have the security and the sovereignty that we all covet and love in this country, is not just simply a matter of having a plane go by or a ship sail by in the ocean. It's about infrastructure. It's about having the capacity to operate and work in the far north, and we're going to build that, and we're going to build that here in Canada. And I think it's a little overdue, but it's an opportunity of nation building that helps us meet this moment. I also want to comment, if I may, because we have worked in alliances, and we said earlier this morning about our friendships and our relationships, and some of those are being challenged for us right now. Canada, for all of its history, has been there for every other nation of the world. We have responded with remarkable courage and resiliency to every challenge. Our armed forces defended democracy and freedom around the world in the First and Second World War, in Korea, in Afghanistan, and in conflicts everywhere around the world. But I think we also have another responsibility, which is the defense of this country. And for a very long time, I think we became complacent as Canadians about our responsibility to defend our country. Perhaps the best expression of that defense is through NORAD. I believe that relationship is still very important to us all. I believe that we have to work hard to maintain that and to do our part. And so Canada is going to be investing over $38 billion in building a new over-the-horizon radar system and investing in the modernization of our NORAD capabilities. I've had a number of conversations with the Americans, and as I said, General Guillot is coming, the commander of NORAD is coming to see me later on today, because we want to make sure that the strength of that and the resiliency of that relationship is maintained. But at the same time, I think it's also important in the current environment to say that Canada is going to have to stand up on its own 2 feet. Canada is going to have to take responsibility for its own defense. Canada is going to have to do more and contribute more to our alliances and partnerships. And so, all of that is to say, I believe that there is a real opportunity before us in the defense industry and in security to actually meet this extraordinary moment. We are going to have the opportunity to invest in our country, in our companies, in our workers, but most importantly, in our armed forces. We have the right leadership within the armed forces. We have the great relationships within our industry. We have the opportunity to actually build a stronger, more resilient and secure and safe nation if we do it all together. And so, I want to encourage you in this conversation to reflect on what Canada needs to do in its future. And I want you, if you have ideas and thoughts about what we need to do, I want you to share those with us, because this is an all-Team Canada approach to what needs to be done in this country today and going forward. There are real challenges in the world. In our support for NATO and with our NATO allies in support of Ukraine, Canada is going to remain steadfast and in our support for Ukraine. But that situation is changing, and we will continue to adapt in our response to be there for Ukraine and to be there for our allies and to make sure Canada does its part. And so I will conclude my remarks, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you here today, Yuri, just to say that I think that there is a great challenge facing this country, but I have great confidence. I have great confidence in all the men and women who have chosen to serve, all of our partners in Canada and in industry, and I have confidence in our partners around the world. One of the things that we have also seen over history is that there are new political administrations come with different governments, and they come and they go. But the strength and resiliency of our relationships within national defense and in global defense and with our allies and partners is resilient, dependable. And I think that we can continue to do our part to hold on to that and to maintain those relationships. We are stronger when we are united and together. And although the current political environment can be extremely challenging for all of us, I believe it is also an opportunity for all of us to step up and to assert Canada's role for our country, but in the world. And I believe we all have a part in that. And I commend you to this week's conference and this conversation, because it continues to advance what we need to do as a nation. But I believe that we are more than up to the task. Thank you.
Good for a bit of a conversation.
Of course. I'll take that down.
Minister, well, thank you again for being with us. And we're going to take a few minutes to sort of pursue a few additional ideas with the minister over the next few minutes, if you're willing.
Of course. I
promise to be nicer than Mercedes Stevenson was with you last year.
She was very kind.
No, she was kind, which was actually not why we hired her. So that's why I'm here this year. So the theme for this year's conference is from policy to action. And the government over the last couple of years, starting with Strong, Secure, Engaged, the Indo-Pacific Strategy, the Our North Strong and Free, the recently released Arctic Strategy, has said a lot about why this is important for Canada and for Canadians and what we need to do about it. And I think one of the things, I guess, is as we look at that, it's hard to take issue with the analysis or what we actually need to do to kind of move forward. So I guess the question is, how do we move from the words to the actions? And you've laid out a few of those ideas. What I'm curious about, Minister, is do you see the alignment right now with the government, with our government departments, working with industry to actually make good on those kind of ideas? And for you personally, what are your one or two, no kidding, we got to get this done priorities?
Yeah, thanks very much, Guy. I think it's an important question. I think sometimes we are a little heavy on policy and a little less heavy on outcomes. And outcomes is right now, the outcomes is the only thing that's important. I would point to a couple of things that I think have been, I hope, positive indications of our commitment to the right outcome. We've done a couple of significant procurements just in the last few months, and procurements sometimes take forever. But when the Armed Forces comes and says, we have an urgent need for something right now, And we've been able to cut through a lot of those processes and go to assume some risk and to get some things done. And I'm kind of proud of some of those things, and I hope it's, part of my intention was to deliver for the armed forces what they said they wanted and needed, and I think we've been able to achieve that, not perfectly, but we're getting there. But I was also trying to send an invitation or an indication to industry that we're looking for a different kind of relationship here. We've got things that we've got to do with it, and there's a sense of urgency to it. I've actually tried to cultivate for my ministry sort of a perception that we're in a hurry, because we need to be in a hurry. Quite honestly, we really need to be in a hurry. 30 years of underinvestment has put us in a place. I remember when I first got in here, and I have nothing but respect and honor the service and the leadership of our armed forces, but many of the generals came to me and they told me about the sorry state that the Canadian Armed Forces was in, that we didn't have enough people, that our facilities were falling apart, we didn't have enough ammunition to meet any kind of a challenge. And I said, you guys are being awfully hard on yourself. But they were trying to tell me we needed to go. We needed to go fast, and we needed to do some things. It was one of the reasons the conversation with Canadians was so important for me. Politics, we always seem to be trapped in this electoral cycle. Every 4 years or less, we have an election. And people have been working to that cycle. I think that we have to sort of break through that and say, and that's why the conversation was really with Canadians. It wasn't just a political conversation, it was a conversation with Canadians. We really started to talk to Canadians, all of us, about what needed to be done and why. The defense policy. I think our defense policy that we put out last April, I think what it really accomplished for us, it had things that we were looking to explore and things we needed to buy. But it told Canadians about their story. It told them about the challenges we faced, but also the opportunities we face in Canada. And it talked about our responsibility to our nation, to build our own nation, and to build the infrastructure and the resiliency that really asserts our sovereignty in the North. And I think Canadians have really responded well to that conversation. When I first came into this job a couple of years ago, less than 30% of Canadians supported additional defense spending. That's up to 70% now, which is amazing. It wasn't on the top 20 list of spending priorities in defense. It's now in the top 5. Canadians are thinking about it and talking about it. That's how it happens. That's how it gets done. No political leadership in this country can ignore the will of Canadians. And Canadians are now asserting that will. They recognize this is something important. We need to do this. And our responsibility in the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defense is to say that we're not just going to spend your money. We're going to invest your money. We're going to invest your money in real outcomes. Invest your money in outcomes that provide greater resilience, but they also have a capacity to build our nation, to build that infrastructure, and to make sure that we've got the people we need. And I'm hoping it also sends a message to the members of the Canadian Armed Forces, who are the best people I know, that Canadians support you. Canadians value what you do, and Canadians are prepared to make an investment in you. And that was an important conversation we needed to initiate. I think we're there now. And that's one of the reasons I'm optimistic about where we're going to go. Yes, this is challenging, but we're ready, and we'll meet it.
Well, I think, Minister, when you look at the moment as has been described and recognizing the enormity of the challenge, we've talked a lot about having a mobilization mindset in Canada. I think what you're describing is the need to have that mobilization mindset. It's true that Canadians, I think, are responding to the international situation, responding to the threats that we're seeing from a friend and ally towards our own way of life. But they also have a lot of other things on their minds. With the economy and the housing and all those issues remain true in terms of those concerns that Canadians have. It wasn't so long ago, Minister, that you were describing the challenge of making the case to your cabinet colleagues about spending 2% of GDP. And while right now it seems that the issues are very prominent, when we go into this next period, how do we not lose momentum? There's going to be a change of government one way or another. We've seen the problem when you go into a writ period, then you're into a campaign period, then there's going to be an election period, and we can't lose momentum. I'm just curious what you see as being the way to make sure that we don't lose momentum in this next year on all the initiatives that you've been working on so hard to move forward.
And I think that momentum can be maintained. As long as it was a tough conversation when you just talk about how much you have to spend. 2%, by the way, is a lot of money. It's about $70 billion a year. That's a lot of money. If we only are talking about how much we have to spend, it's a tough conversation because you're competing with everything else we have to spend money on. But when you talk about it in terms of an investment in Canada, an investment in our security, our safety, our sovereignty, but it's also an investment done right that gives us an opportunity to support Canadian industry, Canadian workers, the Canadian economy. Like yes, it's a lot of money that we have to spend, but just as an example, we're going to be building a new fleet of River-class destroyers in Nova Scotia over the next several years. That contract is going to sustain 11,000 jobs in Nova Scotia for the next 25 years. It'll put $40 billion back into the Canadian economy. That's an investment that I think we can say to Canadians right now who are worried about their jobs and worried about our economy and worried about sort of the economic prosperity of the country. This is also a path to prosperity. And I know when I go north, for example, when we go to those communities and we talk about making investments in the Canadian Armed Forces in the north, that it's multi-use infrastructure. It's going to bring better airports and runways and fiber optic communications and better health services and roads and other infrastructure that's going to benefit the people of the north. It's going to strengthen our country. And I think as long as we present the important work that we're doing that way, that we can show that we are responsibly investing their money in value for the Canadian Armed Forces and building up its strength and resiliency, and Canadians have agreed that this needs to happen. We need to do a better job of defending our own interests in Canada and around the world, but that we are going to do it in a way which is in partnership with industry, in partnership with labor, in partnership with Canadians. I think that's the way to sustain this initiative. Canadians, I believe Canadians have really come to understand the importance of making these investments, and our responsibility is that we have to be able to assure them that we're going to spend their money carefully. My dad always told me, be careful when you're spending other people's money. And I think it's always good advice. And so we need to go to Canadians, not to tell them how much we have to spend, but the why and the how and what benefit we will all, what's the return on that investment? I think it's clear. It is our responsibility and any future government's responsibility to make that very clear to Canadians why this investment is the right investment for their hard-earned tax dollars.
Well, hopefully that will hold up, and it would be nice to see when we get to that point the federal leaders' debates talking about these issues, because we would recognize over the last several years they haven't really been talking about these issues because the view was it wasn't important enough to Canadians, but hopefully that will be changing just as you've described. Maybe we can just pull on the thread, Minister, of the Defence Industrial Strategy. Arno Strong and Fried talked a little bit about defence procurement reforms and kind of a review of defence procurement policies that we've got being led, I think, through the Privy Council work, and then, of course, your department with the Assistant Deputy Minister of Policy is kind of working on a defence industrial strategy. I know all of our partners that are here with us and many of our sponsors are really interested, obviously, in having this relationship with the Government of Canada, with the Department of National Defence. I think when you kind of look at who is defence industry in Canada, they're us. They're us who have served, and they want nothing more than to actually support the Government of Canada, the armed forces, and the support of their missions. And so when can we anticipate to see kind of what the framework looks like for this defence industrial strategy? And one of the things that seems still true is that there's many players that are involved. The Department of National Defence, ISED, PSPC, Treasury Board, all have a role to play in defence procurement. And do you see that changing in order to help us accelerate the programs through the bureaucracy that's been built up to handle defence procurement?
Let me acknowledge, first of all, I don't think the bureaucracy is the problem. Our officials are not the challenge. I think we've required of them sometimes processes that are risk averse. Right. And trying to avoid risk, I think sometimes you just have to embrace risk and manage it. You have to acknowledge that there is risk in the work that we're doing, but there are greater risks of not doing it. Right. And we need to move on it, and we need to move quickly. The conversations that we've been having with industry, for me, have been incredibly revealing. I come from the public service. I spent most of my life in trying to keep people safe, but I don't always have a deep understanding of industry. So I'm asking them, like, what do you need from me? How do we work better together? And we're getting some really good advice. I think it really is about, first of all, building a relationship. We aim for partnership sort of as the end state, but a little bit of candor, honesty, sharing some of the challenges, and a willingness to embrace risk together. Because companies naturally, because they have shareholders and responsibility to their workers, they're risk adverse too. But I think if we can spread that around a little bit, and there's a common understanding what we need to do. I think for a very long time, that because of our relationship with our allies, and particularly the United States, it was always easy to go and buy whatever remarkable thing that they had developed. I think this current environment, that excludes some of the remarkable innovators and industries that exist right here in Canada. I think we need to turn more to increasing domestic production, but just saying that apparently is a lot easier than doing it. We've really faced that challenge. I remember I've gone to some companies and say, okay, we bought 1,000 of these things, and we now need 10,000. And they said, no problem, 10 years. Wait a minute, it's just but we need them now. And we need to understand why that's a challenge and what we need to do to help them get to that 10,000, because we have to increase productivity and production. There's also, I think, the actions of our closest friend right now is compelling us to look around the world to diversify a little bit in our relationships. And so I've also been meeting with Europeans and signing agreements with them to try to connect their industries to ours, our innovators to them. And one of the things that I think has happened for a very long time, I deal with the Germans, the French, the Americans, everybody. Their ministers of defense and their CHODs often are out there, boosting their own industrial capacity and selling their industries to the rest of the world. We've been a little bit reluctant to do that. I think that's one of my jobs. I really have come to learn that I've got to go out there and be an advocate for Canadian workers and Canadian industry and the Canadian contribution to this thing, because I think we've got a great deal to contribute. I think we've got a great capacity to market around the world. But one of the things that industry's told us is how tough it is to do business with somebody else if they can't do business with me. And so we just have to think that through, and we have to find the right path forward. And I think doing it together, like there's no one sector, either the public service, the Department of National Defense, industry, that can do this on their own. I think we have to find ways to collaborate, cooperate, and even to form partnerships to go out and get the job done. The job's too important not to do it. And the current circumstances have told us, perhaps we have been overly reliant on others for too long, and now is the time that we need to stand together on our own feet and get the job done. And I think there's a great opportunity to do this. We've got a lot of money to invest in the Canadian Armed Forces in the coming years. I want to make sure that we get real value for those investments, and I think doing as much of that as possible in Canada is the right way to do it.
Maybe I could pick up on the thoughts on sovereignty. Our strategic assumptions about Canada, 40 million people, the second largest territorial landmass, the world's largest coastlines, relatively small permanent force, is that the defense of our sovereignty for Canada can only be done with the assistance of others, in a partnership in continental defense, relying on an international system that's been built to guarantee security for nations with the UN Charter, the NATO alliance, and those kind of strategic assumptions underlie really our approach to these issues. So I guess the question, Minister, for you, and you kind of referred to it, of a need for us to have maybe some diversification in some of our thinking about our ability to operate independently, but you also reinforced the importance from your perspective of NORAD and the continental partnership. So I guess given what we're seeing, for Canadians right now, are the fundamental assumptions about our defense still valid? And if they're changing, if they're shifting, what do we need to do in response to that in the context of our national defense and our national security?
Yeah, I hope I made it very clear. I still very much value our alliances, particularly NORAD and NATO. I think that Canada needs to step up and do more to support both of those alliances. We have to do our part, and we have to do more. And just on NORAD, as an example, we know, because we've already announced significant new investments, but we've got a lot of work to do. I'm not a big fan of announcements. I like to see things actually move forward and start getting done, and I think we need to be able to demonstrate that. But I think we've got a great opportunity to be able to demonstrate to our allies and to our own country that we're ready to do what is required in the defense of this country. The threat environment, this was well articulated in our defense policy. The threat environment's changing. Through climate change, the Arctic is far more accessible. As a result of the activities of certain of our adversaries, notably China and Russia, they're becoming far more threatening, and new technologies with continental cruise, ballistic, hypersonic missiles. That's the new threat environment. And so we know we are responsible for an enormous amount of territory, which is also creates a vulnerability for our closest friends and allies, and as well, because we need to improve our domain awareness in that area, and we also have to strengthen our ability to defend our territory and to do our part to help defend our neighbors. They have a responsibility shared with us to do that as well. And so we've talked about in the defense policy, and I think there's some really important and necessary work that's going to be done on creating an integrated air and missile defense capability for all of North America, and Canada has a significant responsibility, and that includes marine domain awareness as well as space and aeronautic domain awareness, but it also is going to require significant investments in capacity, capability through integrated air and missile defense. I think that for a very long time we've relied on others to do that, and I don't think that we can rely on that for the future. I think we're going to have to step up, take more responsibility, and make our own investments to make sure that we're doing our part as part of those alliances. And I think that opportunity is ahead of us, and it's the conversation that I think is really critical and important right now going forward with our allies. Sometimes I think the new administration perhaps doesn't have a full appreciation of what Canada's role is in NORAD, for example. So we've got some work to do there. It's a conversation I've already initiated with the American Secretary of Defense. I've talked to him about the investments that we are prepared to make and the work that we're preparing to do to make sure that we're holding up our end of that relationship. And at the same time, it is our responsibility to defend our country. I think that's what Canadians expect of us. It's the conversation we've been having with Canadians that's going to require significant new investments, and we're ready to make them.
Maybe just the last question, Minister. The unfolding situation in Ukraine and the way that this is going to play out, from your perspective. Obviously, Canada's been a very strong supporter of Ukraine, helping not only with the training mission, but the material support, the financial support. And we heard when the Prime Minister traveled to London this past weekend about the potential for a European force to be involved with a potential peacekeeping force that could go in when there is a peace to be had. What are you thinking, Minister, about how this situation with Ukraine is going to play out, and where does Canada fit into that picture?
Yeah, I think that we are part of important discussions right now, and we've been working with our allies, particularly through NSATU, which is an American-led but a NATO organization, in how to continue to support Ukraine. There are important discussions now taking place, and as you said, our Prime Minister was in London on the weekend and was part of those conversations. Canada will play a role. We have since 2015. We were in Ukraine training their armed forces. That training was critical to their survival in the earliest weeks of the illegal Russian invasion into their country. We've continued that training out of country for some considerable period of time. We are now talking with our allies about how we can bring that training to be more effective for the Ukrainian armed forces in or near Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine is rapidly evolving, and if we can get to a position of a cessation of the immediate hostilities, of ceasefire, Canada is prepared to participate with, it wouldn't be a NATO initiative, but really a coalition of the willing, and we've strongly indicated we're willing to be part of that. But I still believe it is going to require security guarantees from the United States, and that's part of the most important discussion that's taking place as to how those security guarantees can be provided, because we want to be able to be effective for Ukraine and to actually create a just and sustainable peace in that country. But I would also acknowledge I was in Ukraine a couple weeks ago. I met with President Zelensky and had a number of conversations with their defense minister. They know that the situation is evolving and that they are quite willing to find ways to accommodate everyone's concerns, but they have some pretty strong positions with respect to their security, their sovereignty, the sovereignty of their borders, and it's a complex discussion that is taking place. But I think they have been reassured certainly by their European allies and by Canada, that we are going to stand with them and continue to stand with them. I think there's also real opportunities there for us to continue to support Ukraine in a number of different ways. Certainly the providing of military munitions and equipment has been really important, but if there's a cessation of hostilities, it doesn't mean the work's over. I think that sustaining that peace, if it can be achieved, is going to be critical, and I think Canada has a significant role to play there.
Minister, we could probably spend the entire 2 days just talking about the issues that I'm sure are on your plate and what you're making of them. But I think what you've done is you've given us a really great opener for our conversations here to unfold for the next 2 days. Hopefully you can come back. We have the Commander NORAD. I know you're going to be talking to him, so maybe you can come back with him when he's here, and maybe later today when the Chief is here. It'd be great to see you. But if I could, I would just, on behalf of all of us who've been watching you in action, understanding what the time that you've found yourself in as the Minister of National Defence, how difficult it is, and the challenges that you've confronted. And as I said in my opening remarks, we see you being in earnest. We still see you as a top cop out of Toronto, and don't really see you as a politician, a career politician. And for us, that's kind of refreshing to have someone who kind of really relates to the men and women who are serving, and that's your quality. Minister, I'd just like to thank you for your service.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm still hopeful that I'll be able to come back. And But I wanted to share with you, because you mentioned I did spend an awful lot of time doing something else for a living. And I often say that the job I have now, I have the best job in the government. It's the second best job I ever had. But when I finished 10 years as the police chief in Toronto, somebody asked me on my last day, they came to my last day and said, what was the worst day like? And I thought about it for a second, and I actually said to the person, it was terrific. Because that was the day we had to be our best. And I reflect on that today, because these are difficult times. Canada is facing enormous challenges, economically, but also in our safety and security. These are the days that we will all reflect back on. These were the days we had to be our best.
Thanks, Minister.
Thank you very much.